She was standing in front of her class reading a picture book with a soft smile. The kids listened, giggled, trusted her. But the dog, he stood frozen. Then he barked, loud, again. Everyone thought it was a mistake, a retired canine just confused. But when they opened the little girl's backpack, they found what no one was ready for. What if the one person your child trusts most is wearing a mask? Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Cedar Hill was a small town tucked into the southern edge of Oregon, cradled between rolling pine forests and winding country roads that always seemed to shimmer under the early autumn sun. On this crisp Wednesday morning, the sky was painted a brilliant pale blue, the kind that promised nothing more than gentle breezes and the scent of dry leaves. A gentle warmth lingered from the summer just past, but the bite of fall had begun to whisper through the air. Officer Matt Walker stepped out of his cruiser, holding the leash of his retired canine partner, Bailey. Bailey was a 6-year-old golden retriever with a dense, honey-colored coat that rippled in the breeze. His eyes were intelligent and soft, rimmed with age-worn lines that hinted at years of loyal service. Though he had officially retired from the force a year ago, Bailey retained a soldier's instinct, calm, watchful, and alert, even in rest. He had once tracked down a lost toddler in the mountains and was known across the county as the gentle nose of justice. Unlike many canines, Bailey had been trained not for aggression, but for search, rescue, and emotional support, especially for children. Matt, in his early 40s, stood tall, with the worn look of a man who had seen both the worst and best of humanity. His brown hair was thinning at the temples, and crow's feet etched deep around eyes that had once been bright, but now carried a tint of fatigue. He was respected in Cedar Hill not just as a lawman, but as a neighbor, dependable, level-headed, and never too busy for a kid's question or a senior's story. His wife had passed 5 years ago in a car accident, a loss that had left him quieter, more introspective, and deeply protective of the vulnerable. Today was career day at Cedar Hill Elementary, and Matt had been invited to give a short talk to the third-grade classes about police work. He had brought Bailey along to charm the kids, a task the dog never failed at. As they walked through the front doors of the school, bright posters fluttered on the bulletin boards, cut-out stars, crayon-drawn firefighters, and glittery police badges made by tiny hands. Inside classroom 3B, the walls were covered with affirmations. Be kind. Mistakes are how we learn you are enough. The room smelled faintly of crayons and graham crackers, with sunlight spilling through the high windows and warming the floor where beanbags circled a reading rug. The teacher, Ms. Heather Monroe, stood by the board, preparing the room with careful precision. Heather was in her mid-30s, medium height, with wavy auburn hair tucked neatly into a low bun. Her figure was slender, and she wore a navy blouse tucked into a tan skirt with flats that squeaked slightly as she moved. She had a voice like chamomile tea, gentle, soothing, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had joined the school that semester, transferring from a district up north. To parents, she seemed warm and invested. To her students, she was kind, albeit sometimes overly observant, as if cataloging every move. When Matt stepped inside with Bailey, the class clapped with glee. A few children stood on tiptoe to get a better look at the dog. But Bailey didn't wag his tail. He didn't walk ahead or sniff around the floor like he usually did. Instead, the moment they crossed the threshold, Bailey froze. His head lifted, nose flared, eyes narrowed. His whole body tensed like a drawn bow. Then he growled. It wasn't loud at first, just a low vibrating note deep in his chest. A few students giggled nervously, assuming he'd seen something outside. But Matt's brow furrowed. Bailey never growled. Not once in all the years he'd been on the force, not at strangers, not even at other dogs, and now his eyes were locked onto Heather Monroe. "Bailey, heel," Matt said, giving the leash a gentle tug. Bailey didn't move. The growl became a bark, sharp, forceful, direct. Several kids jumped. A boy near the front covered his ears. One girl whimpered and clutched her desk. Heather took a small step backward, hand slightly raised. "He must smell my lunch," she offered with a smile that now seemed a bit too tight. "Just a granola bar." "I'm sorry," Matt said, trying to calm Bailey. "He usually loves classrooms." But the dog wasn't barking at food. His body was rigid, tail stiff, ears flattened slightly as he pulled forward once more, snarling now. Matt had to grip the leash with both hands. Chloe Sanders, a quiet, freckle-faced girl with glasses and a sunflower hair clip, sat frozen in her seat. Her wide eyes darted between Ms. Monroe and Bailey, her fingers white-knuckling the edges of her chair. "Maybe I should step out," Heather said quickly, her voice still level, but her knuckles pale against the desk. Bailey's barking didn't stop until she left the room. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the golden retriever slowly sat down, eyes still fixed on the door breath, heavy but steady. Matt knelt beside him, puzzled and uneasy. He scratched behind Bailey's ears, something the dog usually loved. Bailey didn't respond, still tense, still watching. Not far from the school, just a 15-minute drive south, was the Cedar Ridge Nursing Home. It was a white colonial-style building shaded by ancient oaks with a small garden out back where residents fed birds and chatted about their grandchildren. Inside, 17-year-old Emily Collins was finishing her volunteer shift. She came by 3 times a week after school, helping serve meals and reading to the residents. Her heart was gentle, and her patient's deep traits, shaped by growing up with her autistic younger brother. Emily had long ash-blonde hair and wore it in a braid down her back. She was tall and thin with a quiet presence that made people trust her without knowing why. Her favorite resident was Mrs. May Fletcher, a woman in her late 80s with early-stage dementia, who once taught music at Cedar Hill High. That day, Emily found May sitting alone by the window, staring into the courtyard. Her lips were moving without sound. Emily sat beside her and offered a warm smile. "What are you thinking about today, Mrs. Fletcher?" The old woman's eyes flickered. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she murmured, "Heather. Heather's not real. She's not who she says." Emily blinked, leaning in. "Heather, who?" But May only turned away and closed her eyes as if the effort of remembering had drained her completely. The mist over Cedar Hill hadn't lifted by morning. It hung like a breath held too long, blanketing the town in a silence that felt deeper than usual. Officer Matt Walker stood by his cruiser in the station lot, his hand resting on Bailey's golden head. The golden retriever had been quiet since the previous day's incident in classroom 3B, but not in a restful way. His body was tense. His eyes kept darting toward the school whenever they passed the window as if waiting to be called back. Matt couldn't get the image out of his mind, Bailey's sudden unprovoked aggression toward Heather Monroe. In all their years working together, he had never seen Bailey behave that way. And it hadn't been random. Bailey had targeted his attention, his growls, his instincts at her. Heather Monroe had been at Cedar Hill Elementary for barely 2 months. According to her personnel file, she transferred from upstate Medford with flawless references. She was always composed, always kind and popular with the parents. But yesterday, Bailey had looked at her like she wasn't what she claimed to be. Matt had to be sure. That morning, instead of heading to patrol, he lingered near the school in his cruiser, windows down, Bailey beside him. When Heather's silver sedan pulled into the lot, He stayed where he was watching through the windshield as she stepped out. She wore a fitted gray coat over a burgundy dress, her auburn hair in its usual low twist. She smiled and waved to a passing parent. The smile was polished perfect, but something about it made the back of Matt's neck itch. He turned his attention to Bailey. The dog was now upright, ears forward, eyes following Heather's every move. His nose twitched slightly. As she disappeared through the school's front doors, Bailey gave a low, short growl, not loud, just enough to be heard. Matt narrowed his eyes. That afternoon during school dismissal, Matt returned with a purposefully casual air. He walked the hall with Principal Whitaker's permission, greeting a few teachers and stopping briefly outside room 3B. Inside, the students were packing their bags, and Heather Monroe was kneeling beside a desk Chloe Sanders. Chloe was a quiet girl, 8 years old, shoulder-length dark blonde hair usually tied in braids, pale blue glasses slipping down her nose. She was small and slight, often lost in the shuffle of louder children. That day she wore a pink hoodie with frayed sleeves and sat with her arms tucked into her chest as if trying to shrink into herself. Heather leaned in, whispering something to her with a gentle smile. Chloe nodded hesitantly, her expression unreadable. Bailey, standing at Matt's side in the hallway, gave a single sharp bark. Matt flinched. The bark had come without warning, sudden and loud, drawing stares from a few nearby classrooms. He quickly tugged on the leash and moved back down the hall. When they exited the school, Bailey kept glancing over his shoulder, his body alert, the fur along his neck bristling slightly. Across town, under the amber shade of maple trees, Emily Collins pushed open the doors of Cedar Ridge Nursing Home. She walked with light steps down the hall, her volunteer badge bouncing against her chest. Her after-school visits had become a comfort not only for the residents but for herself. Room 204 was quiet, save for the ticking of a plastic clock. Mrs. May Fletcher sat near the window, her posture still as stone. Emily knocked softly and entered. "Hi, Mrs. Fletcher. I brought you something." May turned her head slowly. Her expression was blank at first, then softened into faint recognition. Emily held up a small sketch pad and a pencil. "Yesterday, you said something about someone named Heather. Do you remember?" May didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted toward the window. "I think you saw something," Emily pressed gently, kneeling beside her. "Something important. Do you think you can show me?" After a long pause, May reached out a trembling hand. Emily placed the pencil in her fingers and turned the pad to a fresh page. At first, May just made slow, hesitant strokes, circles vague shapes. But then the lines became more purposeful. She drew a face, smooth and narrow, with overly symmetrical features. The eyes were wide, too wide, and heavily shaded. Then came a detail that made Emily stop breathing, a fine line across the jaw like a seam, and around the top of the head a subtle curve that looked like the edge of a mask. May spoke at last. Her voice was thin as tissue. "She wears kindness like a costume, but underneath, she's something else." Emily stared at the drawing. A woman with green-blue eyes behind a mask. "A mask," she whispered. May nodded faintly. "Not a real one. A face. Not hers." Emily's fingers tightened on the sketch pad. This wasn't just a confused old woman's dream. This was a memory. The wind had shifted in Cedar Hill. The air that morning was colder, sharper, the type that slid down collars and crept beneath sleeves. Outside Cedar Hill Elementary, the playground was mostly silent. Even the usual giggles and bell chimes from the early arrivals seemed dampened, like the town itself was holding its breath. Officer Matt Walker stood near the school entrance, one hand resting on Bailey's leash. The golden retriever sat alert, his body rigid but quiet. Ever since the second incident, the bark outside room 3B, when Chloe Sanders was with Heather, Matt's gut had been churning. There was something wrong. Something deeply wrong. Today, Matt had come under the guise of a safety inspection, a routine check that most schools welcomed, especially in the current climate. Principal Whitaker had greeted him stiffly, but didn't object. The incident with Bailey had unsettled the staff, and Whitaker was pragmatic enough to know when to let a uniformed presence smooth the tension. Inside, the school classes proceeded normally. Children whispered over spelling quizzes, pencil erasers tapped nervously against desks, and teachers called for attention over the hum of fluorescent lights. But Matt had eyes for one room only, room 3B. As students filed in after morning recess, Chloe Sanders walked with her shoulders hunched beneath her hoodie, her backpack slung low and dragging slightly on the floor. Matt noticed it immediately. The bag looked heavier than it should. For a third grader carrying nothing more than notebooks and a lunchbox, the weight was off. Bailey did too. The dog stiffened. His ears pricked, nostrils flaring. As Chloe passed the open door with her bag trailing behind her, Bailey let out a sharp bark. Then another. His tail went stiff, his front legs lowered, eyes locked onto the backpack. Heather Monroe turned at the sound. She stood by her desk, a folder in one hand, the same calm smile on her face. "Oh, dear," she said gently, "he's barking again." But her eyes flicked just briefly toward Chloe's bag. That flicker was enough. Matt stepped forward. "Chloe," he said, voice even but firm, "can you bring your bag over here for a second, sweetheart?" Chloe froze. The class went silent. Heather took a step toward Chloe. "I'm sure it's nothing, Officer Walker. She's probably just got some snacks in there." "You know how dogs love food," Bailey growled. "No, really?" Matt said, gaze now fully on the teacher. "Chloe, would you mind?" The little girl turned slowly, eyes wide and glistening. Her fingers gripped the strap, and her voice came out as a whisper. "Am I in trouble?" "Of course not," Matt said gently. "I just want to make sure everything's okay." Chloe hesitated, then walked the bag over with trembling arms and set it down. Matt, crouched beside Bailey, unzipped the main compartment and began sifting through the contents. At first it was exactly what he expected: a pencil pouch, a spiral notebook, a half-eaten granola bar. Then, tucked beneath a folded sweatshirt in a side compartment, he found it: a used syringe cap, and next to it a small cloth strip, light beige, stained slightly with a faint, sharp chemical smell. Matt's face went still. He looked up, meeting Chloe's eyes. The girl burst into tears. "I didn't want to," she cried. "She said if I didn't keep it, something would happen to my mom." Gasps rippled through the class. Heather Monroe's face paled for the briefest moment, then quickly recovered into a mask of concern. "That's ridiculous," she said, stepping forward. "She's clearly misunderstood something. Kids make up stories all the time," Matt stood. "That's far enough, ma'am." Bailey had already moved between Heather and Chloe, placing his body firmly in the teacher's path. The growl rumbling from his chest wasn't loud, but it had weight. It made the room feel smaller. Matt zipped the backpack shut and addressed the class, voice calm but authoritative. "I need everyone to return to your seats. Miss Monroe, please accompany me to the office." Heather didn't move. Bailey took a step forward. Then slowly she nodded. Across town at the Collins residence, the air carried a different tension. Emily sat in the kitchen with her mother, Dana Collins, the woman who had once been the most feared investigative journalist in Lane County. Dana was in her early 50s with sharp cheekbones and a sharper mind. Her salt and pepper hair was always pulled back in a ponytail, and though she'd left the newsroom 5 years ago after a messy expose on local corruption turned into threats against her family, the fire in her hadn't dimmed. Emily slid the sketch across the table. She said her name was Heather, but May said she's not real. Dana studied the drawing. Those eyes, that seam across the jaw. It's like a mask, Emily whispered. Dana sat back. There's something about this that reminds me of a case I never published. 2016. 2 elementary schools in northern Nevada. Both had teachers hired under different names, clean credentials, perfect records. Then one day, one of them just disappeared. The only link between them. Each was close to a vulnerable child, divorced parents, recent trauma, things like that. You think it's her, I think it's time I started looking again. Dana stood and pulled her old laptop from a drawer, already booting it up as she flipped open a dusty notebook labeled Potential Grooming Rings, Unpublished. Emily looked at her mother with a blend of pride and apprehension. Do you think we're in danger? Not yet, Dana said. But if we don't act now, someone else might be. The sky over Cedar Hill was the color of slate, heavy with a stillness that promised rain but refused to deliver. A low fog drifted through the town like something searching, silent and slow. Officer Matt Walker sat alone in the back room of the Cedar Hill Police Department, surrounded by printed files and open case folders. Bailey lay at his feet, chin resting on his front paws, eyes half closed but ears twitching with every distant sound. Matt had been digging through Heather Monroe's records since dawn. The backpack incident had changed everything. Chloe's confession wasn't just the voice of a frightened child, it was a key turning in a long locked door. Now Matt was trying to push it open. He stared again at her file on the Oregon Education System's registry. According to the state, Heather Monroe had graduated from a teaching college in Spokane, worked briefly in rural Idaho, then transferred to Medford before ending up in Cedar Hill. Her references were flawless. Her licensing clean. Too clean. He leaned closer to the screen and pulled up the scanned copy of her photo ID, squinting. Then he cross-referenced the image through an old law enforcement photo database, one not open to the public. After a few minutes of slow-loading results, a match blinked on the screen. Laura Ann James. Age 37. Aliases: Heather Monroe, Emily Clark. Flagged in 2018 by state investigators in Nevada during an investigation into false credentials and suspected grooming activity. Never charged. Disappeared. Matt leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He glanced down at Bailey. The dog looked up at him and blinked slowly, knowingly, as if to say, "You see it now, too." Meanwhile, across town, Dinah Collins sat at her dining room table surrounded by stacks of old reporters' notebooks, printed articles, and a mug of coffee gone cold. Her eyes were sharp, and her mind even sharper, working through a chain of clues, like beads on a string. Emily sat beside her, scrolling through local newspaper archives on Dana's backup laptop. I knew I'd seen that name before, Dana muttered, flipping open a manila folder marked Southwest False Educator Reports. Laura James was flagged twice in 2017 and 2018. She always shows up in small towns just like this one, under different names, always targeting schools with vulnerable kids. Emily's eyes widened. So she's done this before? Dana nodded grimly. And she's never been caught, because she vanishes before anyone can build a case. She uses forged credentials so good they pass most state-level checks. She turned to a specific page in one of her older notebooks and tapped a name she'd underlined years ago. The widow. The widow wasn't a person most people had heard of. She had no photo, no confirmed birth date, no social media, just whispers. She was rumored to operate a highly covert trafficking ring, specializing in young girls from fractured homes, often using women with maternal personas to lure them close. She's always in the background, Dana said. She plants others, teachers, counselors, volunteers. Laura James was connected to her once in a New Mexico case. A school counselor named Natalie Quinn disappeared after an anonymous tip. She and Laura were traced to the same temporary address outside Santa Fe, but no arrests were made. Emily looked pale. Do you think she's working with someone now? I think she never stopped. Dana picked up her phone and started dialing. Time to see if anyone in New Mexico still remembers Laura James. Back at the station, Matt brought the new findings to his captain, a stern man named Franklin Doyle. Captain Doyle was in his early 60s, with silver hair cropped close and a permanent look of guarded skepticism. He'd seen too many cases fall apart due to technicalities, and he had little patience for speculation. Matt handed him the printouts. We've been calling her Heather Monroe, but her real name's Laura James. She's connected to a known grooming network. Chloe's statement and the evidence from her backpack may be enough to open a case. Doyle frowned as he scanned the documents. This is circumstantial, Walker. Unless we get direct ties emails, financial trails, a recorded confession, we'll be chasing ghosts. She's dangerous, Matt said. Bailey knew it before any of us did. Doyle looked down at the golden retriever, who stared back calmly. After a moment, the captain sighed. I'll call the district attorney, but quietly. No arrests yet. We don't want to spook her if she's still gathering targets. Matt nodded. Understood. But I want her watched. Then watch her. Just don't make a move we can't undo. Later that evening, Matt drove slowly through Cedar Hill, passing Heather's small rental house at the edge of town. The porch light was on a soft yellow glow through the curtains. Everything looked normal. Too normal. He didn't stop, but Bailey sat up in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window, watching the house until it vanished behind them. The tension in Cedar Hill was no longer a whisper. It buzzed through the school halls, stirred the blinds in classrooms, and lingered in the eyes of teachers who glanced more frequently toward the door than the chalkboard. Rain had finally come overnight, soft and steady, turning the sidewalks into mirrors and soaking the fallen leaves into the soil. Officer Matt Walker stood outside room 3B once again, one hand resting lightly on Bailey's harness. The golden retriever, ever composed now, displayed a restlessness that Matt hadn't seen even during their busiest days on active K-9 duty. Bailey's head was low, his breathing shallow but steady, and his golden fur shimmered in the weak indoor light. His nose was pointed straight ahead, nostrils flaring softly, ears alert. Inside the classroom, Heather Monroe was reading aloud from a picture book, her voice syrupy and smooth, perfectly controlled. The students sat in a circle, some cross-legged, some sprawled on their stomachs. Chloe Sanders sat nearest to the window, legs pulled up tightly under her chin, her eyes not on the book, but on the floor. Matt knocked gently just once and stepped in. The class turned to look, but Heather didn't miss a beat. Her gaze flicked up with professional calm, and she smiled. "Officer Walker," she said. "What a surprise." "Sorry to interrupt," Matt said. "This won't take long." Bailey walked in beside him. At first all was still. Then the dog's body changed. His tail stiffened, shoulders squared. His eyes locked on Heather Monroe. One slow growl built in his chest, low and steady like a motor revving. And then he barked. Once. Loud, sharp. Children gasped. Heather stood up slowly, placing the book on her desk. "Officer Walker," she said, her tone polite but clipped. "This is very disruptive." Matt stepped forward, holding a file in one hand. "I need to ask you to come with me to the office." A flicker passed across her face. Just a shadow. But Bailey saw it. He took 2 quick steps toward her, growling louder now. She took a step back, inching toward the back of the classroom. That was when Detective Sarah McConnell entered. Sarah was in her late 40s, lean and sharp-eyed, with cropped black hair streaked with gray, and a scar across her jaw from an undercover bust years ago in El Paso. Her presence always shifted a room. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just the cold assurance of someone who'd spent 2 decades catching predators who wore masks. Sarah held a printed document in her hand. "We found your list," she said evenly, "hidden inside a hollowed-out science book in your desk drawer." The classroom went still. Heather's lips parted, but no words came. "We know your real name." "Laura," Sarah continued, "and we know what this list is." She placed the document on a nearby desk. Written in carefully neat handwriting were 13 names, students from Cedar Hill Elementary. Most had notes beside them: single-parent mother, ill father, working nights. Chloe's name was near the top. The room remained silent, except for the wind tapping softly against the glass. "I didn't," Heather began. Bailey barked again, louder, moving to stand directly between her and the students. Then slowly she raised both hands. Matt took out his cuffs. "Laura James, you're under arrest for suspicion of child endangerment, identity fraud, and possession of restricted substances on school property." She didn't struggle. Outside, Dana Collins and her daughter Emily stood at the school gates. They had come the moment they received Matt's call. Dana clutched the sketch Mrs. May Fletcher had drawn and a printed court document from 8 years prior, evidence that had never been heard. Emily stood beside her, tense, unsure what to expect. When Heather No Laura was led out of the building in handcuffs, Dana took a step forward. Their eyes met. "I remember you," Dana said flatly. "You were there when May's granddaughter disappeared. You testified that you'd only known her a week, but she drew your face before the ambulance even came." Laura didn't reply. She looked away. Emily, though barely 17, held her mother's arm tightly and spoke with unexpected calm. "Why do you always smile like that when people are scared?" Laura flinched. Sarah McConnell walked over, handing Dana the seized list. "We don't know how many times she's done this, but she won't do it again. The evidence is finally lining up." Dana nodded, eyes glistening. "It should have happened 8 years ago, but it's happening now." Bailey stood quietly nearby, still watchful. The interrogation room inside the Cedar Hill Sheriff's Department was dim, the single overhead light casting hard shadows across the table. Laura James sat in the metal chair, her wrists cuffed loosely before her, her back straight, jaw tight. She wore no expression, no fear, no rage, only the cool detachment of someone who had spent years perfecting masks. Across from her sat Detective Sarah McConnell, arms crossed, a thin folder in front of her. Her voice was calm, measured, but carried the weight of someone who'd spent a lifetime staring monsters in the face. "Chloe's statement lines up with everything we've found so far," Sarah said. "The cloth, the syringe cap, the list. The handwriting matches notes from a previous school district in Nevada. And the alias used there was—" "Guess what? Heather Monroe." Laura didn't blink. "We've got testimony from your former landlord in Santa Fe confirming you used a second identity, Emily Clark. And you worked as a private tutor for 3 months before vanishing the week a child went missing." Still Laura said nothing. Sarah opened the folder. Inside were several old documents, lightly yellowed, carefully preserved. She slid one across the table. "This is from the trial 8 years ago. A woman named May Fletcher accused you of grooming her granddaughter. Said the girl vanished 2 weeks after you were hired as a part-time music assistant at the school. Charges were dropped. Lack of evidence. You disappeared again." Laura finally looked down. Her fingers curled slightly, but her face remained neutral. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You're not walking away this time. We have a child willing to testify. We have physical evidence. And we have your handwriting. It's over." Laura's shoulders sagged just a little. And then quietly, almost like an afterthought, "I didn't take them. I just prepared them at Cedar Ridge Nursing Home." Emily Collins sat once again beside Mrs. May Fletcher. Outside, rain had returned, soft, steady tapping against the glass like a child asking to come in. The air smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. May sat straighter than usual today. Her hands, though still bony and wrinkled, didn't tremble quite so much. Her eyes, clouded but alert, were focused on the sketch Emily had returned to her. "She's gone," Emily said softly. "Laura, or Heather, or whatever her name really is, she's under arrest." May reached out, running her fingertips over the pencil lines she had drawn weeks ago. "I told them," she said, voice firmer now. "I told the court, the school board, the police. No one listened." "I believe you now," Emily whispered. May turned to her, slowly studying her. Then unexpectedly she placed a hand on Emily's cheek. "You look just like her." Emily blinked. "Who my daughter May said. My little Ellie." Emily stiffened. May continued. "They told me she was dead, that her body was never found. But I knew. I always knew she wasn't gone. Just taken." Emily's voice was tight. "What was her full name?" "Eleanor May Fletcher," the woman said, her voice cracking. "Born May 2nd, 1995. Brown eyes, hair like honey when the sun hit it." Emily's mouth parted slightly. She had never known her birth name, just that she'd been adopted after being found abandoned near the state line when she was 2. Her adoptive mother, Dana, had told her they never found the biological parents. May was staring at her now with eyes filled with fragile hope. "Your eyes. I remember your eyes." Emily took her hand. "You think I'm her." May nodded slowly. "I don't think I know." Back at the sheriff's department, Dana Collins sat across from Officer Matt Walker in the conference room, her expression unreadable. She held an envelope in her hand, a DNA kit sent overnight by an old journalist contact who now worked for a private investigative lab in Portland. "They're willing to fast-track it," she said. "I already submitted my side last night. If Emily does hers today, we'll know by the end of the week." Matt leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. "Do you think it's possible?" "I don't know," Dana admitted. "But when I adopted Emily, she had no record, just a foundling report. It was a miracle she survived. I never thought to question where she came from." She paused. "But May's not crazy. Not anymore. Her mind, something in her, is waking up." Matt nodded slowly. "Trauma can cloud memory for years. But truth has a strange way of pulling things back." That night, Emily sat in her room, the swab kit open on her desk. The soft hum of the rain had turned into a downpour, and thunder echoed faintly over the hills. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the freckled face, the ash-blonde braid, the birthmark behind her ear. "I always wondered," she whispered to herself. "Now maybe I'll know." She swabbed the inside of her cheek, gently sealed the sample, and held it close for a moment before placing it in the return envelope. In the holding cell, Laura James sat alone. Her shoes had been taken, her coat folded neatly on the bench outside. Her hair was loose now, falling in tired waves over her shoulders. She stared at the wall, unmoving. From down the corridor came the sound of footsteps, firm, familiar even. Bailey padded to the gate, Matt behind him. Laura turned. The dog stopped, sat, and looked at her, not with hatred or fear, but with something quieter, a knowing, an understanding of what she had tried to hide. "You almost got away again," Matt said, "but you didn't, because of a dog, and a girl who remembered." Laura said nothing, but for the first time her eyes filled. The morning sun returned to Cedar Hill, cutting through days of storm clouds like a clean blade. The sidewalks steamed as the pavement dried, and the town felt different, like it had exhaled after holding its breath far too long. But for those who had been close to the case, the air still carried a charge. Inside the Cedar Hill Sheriff's Department, a new figure now stood before the whiteboard covered in pinned photos, threads, and notes. Special Agent Monroe Jennings of the FBI, no relation to the suspect, had arrived the night before from the regional office in Portland. In his late 40s, with dark, slicked-back hair and a square jaw hardened by 20 years of field work, Jennings had the calm intensity of a man who didn't waste words or tolerate nonsense. He wore a black field jacket over a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled. His voice, as he briefed the small team, was clipped and exacting. "We have confirmation from Homeland Security," he began. "The woman you know as Laura James was an active operative in a decentralized trafficking network known as Widow's Web. She's one of 6 suspected recruiters planted over the past decade in public institutions, schools, youth shelters, clinics." Matt Walker sat near the back of the room, arms crossed. Bailey lay beside him, calm but awake, his eyes never leaving the speaker. Dana Collins sat on the far right, flipping through a newly declassified folder she had helped unlock through old press contacts. "Widow's Web is not a singular organization," Jennings continued. "It's more like a strategy, a blueprint passed between cells, each small, localized, and run with precision. They target children in transitional households, single parents, recent trauma, low visibility. They groom, test, trust, isolate, and then they disappear." He pinned a photo to the board. "This man," he said, pointing to a grainy image of a silver-haired man in a tailored jacket, "goes by the name Curtis Vane. We believe he was Laura's next contact. He hasn't been seen in 6 months, but she kept correspondence with him via encrypted messages recovered from a burner phone found hidden in her bathroom wall." Dana stood slowly. "I've seen that name before," she said. "He's popped up in cases in New Mexico, northern Nevada, and Utah. Always within a few weeks of a missing child report. No charges ever stick." Jennings nodded. "We think Cedar Hill was next on his list." That afternoon, Matt walked the halls of Cedar Hill Elementary again, but this time with different energy in the air. Students poked their heads out of classroom doors to wave at him. More than a few sprinted to greet Bailey, who trotted beside him with his usual quiet grace tail swishing lightly behind him. Taped to the hallway lockers were dozens of hand-drawn thank you cards. "Thank you." Officer Bailey read one in large bubble letters. Another had a cartoon sketch of the golden retriever in a cape with the caption, "Super Nose Miss Shannon Porter." The school counselor met Matt by the front office. She was in her 30s, petite with curly red hair and glasses too big for her face. Gentle with kids, but assertive with grown-ups, she was one of the first to raise concerns when Chloe began withdrawing weeks earlier. "We've seen such a change in the kids since Laura—" "Sorry, I mean James was removed," she said softly. "They're opening up. A few of them even admitted they were scared to talk when she was around. They didn't know why." Matt nodded. They didn't have to know. Bailey did. Just then, Chloe herself came walking down the hallway holding a small box wrapped in tissue paper. Her hair was in braids again, and a tiny unicorn clip held one strand back. She looked up at Matt shyly, then knelt beside Bailey. "This is for him," she said. "It's peanut butter treats. I helped my mom make them." Matt accepted the box with a hand over his heart. He's going to love those. Bailey gave one wag of his tail and leaned forward to lick Chloe's hand. She giggled and reached to hug his neck. Meanwhile, across town in a municipal office-turned-task force hub, Dana Collins adjusted to a new role. At the request of the state attorney general's office, she had been invited to act as a civilian consultant on the reinvestigation of past educator records statewide. She now sat behind a desk strewn with files highlighting names, cross-referencing transfers, and flagging patterns in rural hiring data. Her reputation as a reporter, once a liability, was now her greatest asset. "Never thought I'd be working inside the machine," she muttered as she clicked open another file. Across from her sat Erin Glass, a state data analyst in her late 20s, with a keen eye and an ever-growing wall of sticky notes. "You're the first person I've met who uses a red pen and a keyboard at the same time," Erin said, amused. "It's very vintage spy novel." Dana smiled faintly. "That's because this isn't data. It's a story. We just have to figure out what part we're reading." The next folder she opened stopped her cold. A record from a district near Boise. A substitute teacher hired under the name Angela Ray. Same birthday as Laura James. Same photo, just slightly altered. Dana circled the file and stood. "We have another alias." Back in the sheriff's department, Agent Jennings sat in the dimmed conference room, reviewing the collected evidence. He had requested a quiet moment to process and reflect. As he leaned over the reports, he heard a soft shuffle at the door. Bailey stepped in first, followed by Matt. "I thought dogs weren't allowed in federal meetings," Jennings said, not looking up. "He's not a dog," Matt said. "He's a witness." Jennings smirked. "If we had 10 more like him, this task force would already be done." Matt nodded slowly. "I used to think he was slowing down. But I was the one who stopped trusting my instincts. He never did." Jennings tapped a manila envelope. "What he uncovered, it saved lives." Bailey settled down at the foot of the table, resting his chin on his paws, but his eyes stayed open, always watching. It was the kind of morning Cedar Hill hadn't seen in a long time, warm, golden, full of something that felt like forgiveness. The sun touched every rooftop, every flagpole, and every tree on the school lawn, as if the town itself had been waiting for this one quiet moment of joy. At Cedar Hill Elementary, the cafeteria had been transformed for the day. Folding chairs lined the tiled floor, balloons in soft yellow and sky blue floated near the ceiling, and in the corner stood a table draped in white linen stacked with cookies shaped like dog bones and paw prints. A poster above the stage read, "Thank you, Bailey, for guarding what matters most." The room buzzed with students, parents, teachers, and community members. At the center of it all sat Bailey, the 6-year-old golden retriever whose instincts had saved not just one child, but an entire town from a shadow most never even saw coming. His coat had been brushed to a shine, his posture as regal as ever. Around his neck hung a simple red collar, new and vivid against his fur. Emily Collins knelt beside him, a small smile tugging at her lips. Her braid hung loosely over her shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, there was color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. Chloe Sanders stood next to her, clutching a small velvet box. "Go ahead," Emily whispered. Chloe opened the box with care. Inside was a small silver tag engraved with just 3 words, "My best friend." She clipped it gently to the new collar, her fingers trembling slightly. Bailey didn't move, only looked up at her with the quiet dignity of someone who already understood everything that needed to be said. Principal Whitaker, dressed in his formal blue blazer with a slightly crooked tie as usual, stepped up to the podium. His voice cracked just slightly as he welcomed the crowd. "We gather today not just to honor a dog," he said, "but to honor what he protected our children, our truth, and our sense of safety." He gestured toward a velvet curtain covering a new plaque near the library entrance. "From this day forward, our library will be known as the Bailey Room, a space where knowledge is free, stories are safe, and silence can still be trusted." Matt Walker stepped forward next. He looked different today, not just in his dress uniform, but in the weight that had visibly lifted from his shoulders. Standing behind the microphone, he cleared his throat and began. "I've worked with this dog for over 6 years. I've seen him track missing hikers, calm frightened children, and sit quietly beside families who had nothing left but grief. But nothing prepared me for what he did this year." He paused, eyes scanning the students watching intently from the first rows. "We all want to believe the world is safe, that our schools are sacred, that the adults in charge are trustworthy, but sometimes evil smiles, and when it does, we need someone who can see past the smile, someone who listens with more than ears." He looked down at Bailey, whose tail gave a gentle thump against the floor. "That someone for us was this dog." Applause broke across the room, not loud, not raucous, but honest. Outside on the playground after the ceremony, Matt found a quiet bench beneath a blooming cherry tree and sat with Bailey lying beside him. Emily and Chloe chased each other through the grass, laughing, weaving between the trees like light made real. Dana Collins approached a folded envelope in hand. She was in a cream blouse and dark slacks, her hair pinned back tightly. There was something steadier about her now, more grounded, as if a years-long current of guilt and questions had finally found shore. She handed the envelope to Matt. "The DNA results came in this morning." He hesitated. "And it's her," Dana said, voice soft. "Emily is Eleanor May Fletcher." Matt nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "May knows," Dana smiled. "I told her last night." She cried for an hour straight. Then she started singing lullabies in her sleep. They both laughed quietly. A moment later, May herself was wheeled into the yard by a young caregiver, gray curls, pinned back eyes full of age but sharp with something more clarity. She waved at Emily. The girl ran to her without hesitation, collapsing into her arms. As the sky deepened toward late afternoon, the final event of the day unfolded. A mural was unveiled on the outer wall of the school, painted by local high school students. It depicted Bailey in the center, standing tall on a grassy field, surrounded by a ring of children. Above him, painted in arched letters, "Trust like courage begins with one." That evening, as Matt parked his cruiser in the driveway and stepped out, Bailey followed, slower now, but still strong. They sat on the porch as the wind moved gently through the trees. Matt opened a can of beer. Bailey got a bowl of peanut butter treats, courtesy of Chloe. "Funny thing," Matt said, scratching behind Bailey's ear, "how the smallest instincts end up being the biggest truths." Bailey gave a small huff, then laid his head on Matt's boot. In the distance, laughter still echoed from a family walking home from the ceremony. And from every window in Cedar Hill Elementary, soft light poured into the streets, warm, safe, and unbroken. Final message, a lesson from Bailey's journey. Sometimes the greatest miracles come not in thunder or lightning, but in a quiet bark, a soft growl, or the unwavering gaze of a loyal heart. Bailey wasn't just a dog. He was a vessel of instinct, a guardian of innocence, and perhaps something more. In a world that often teaches us to second-guess our intuition, Bailey reminded us that truth often speaks before words ever do. His actions were more than heroic. They were divinely timed. Who placed Bailey in that classroom on that day, at that exact moment when a silent child needed protection? Maybe it wasn't chance. Maybe it was grace, a whisper from God, a breath of justice carried by paws instead of wings. Let this story remind us, even in ordinary days, God works through unexpected vessels, through children, through mothers, through silent strength. And yes, even through a dog. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to reflect on your own life. Who is your Bailey? Where have you seen God's protection even when you didn't recognize it at the time? Drop an amen in the comments if you believe God still sends angels in fur and faith. Share this video to remind someone that they are never truly alone. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of hope, courage, and miracles. May God bless you and your family. May He guide your instincts, protect your loved ones, and send you your own Bailey when you need Him most. Amen.